Cooper Tower crushed a single mother's hopes with 3 cruel words. "You're fired. Leave." The cafe fell silent as Ella clutched her apron, tears streaming down her face. From the corner booth, Keanu Reeves watched the scene unfold, his coffee untouched. The cruelty in Cooper's eyes, the whispers from shocked customers, Ella's quiet dignity as she walked away. Something inside Keanu shifted. What he witnessed wouldn't just end with a woman losing her job. What happened next would change lives forever, including his own. The downtown cafe sat nestled between towering office buildings, a quiet refuge in the chaos of urban life. Each morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries welcomed workers escaping their monotonous routines, if only for 15 minutes. For 3 years, Ella Miller had been the heart of this establishment, her warm smile greeting everyone who walked through the door, regardless of the heaviness she carried on her shoulders. Ella was 34, with soft brown hair often hastily tied back, and eyes that held both kindness and exhaustion in equal measure. A single mother of 2 young children, Emma, 8, and Liam, 6. She had been on her own since her husband walked out 2 years ago, leaving nothing but empty promises and mounting bills. The cafe job wasn't glamorous, but it provided stability, health care for her children, and enough flexibility to attend school performances and doctor appointments. Her boss, Cooper Tower, was everything Ella wasn't. At 42, he had inherited the cafe from his father, along with 3 other locations across the city. Cooper wore tailored suits that seemed out of place behind a coffee counter, his salt and pepper hair meticulously styled, his voice carrying a sharpness that made employees flinch. He kept a careful distance from the messy parts of the business, the early morning preparations, the holiday rushes, the cleanup after closing. Cooper appeared mainly to inspect, criticize, and remind everyone who signed their paychecks. To Cooper, the cafe was merely an investment, a stepping stone to bigger ventures. He viewed his employees not as people with lives and responsibilities, but as expendable parts in his money-making machine. In recent months, he had begun cutting corners, reducing hours, eliminating small benefits, demanding more work for the same pay. Those who complained quietly disappeared from the schedule. Ella endured it all silently. Her children needed stability. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with rent due and Liam's asthma medication costing more each month. So she arrived earlier, stayed later, covered shifts when others quit, and never once mentioned the slow erosion of the workplace she had once loved. Keanu Reeves had discovered the downtown cafe 6 months ago while filming in the city. Unlike many celebrities who demanded private spaces or special treatment, Keanu sought normalcy, places where he could simply exist as another human being sharing the same space. The cafe, with its worn leather booths and corner tables, offered exactly that. 3 times a week, he would arrive mid-morning, order a black coffee and sometimes a blueberry muffin, and spend an hour reading scripts or simply watching the world go by. Over time, Keanu had noticed Ella. Not in the way men often notice attractive women, but in the way one notices quiet strength. He saw how she remembered regular customers' orders before they spoke, how she slipped extra cookies to harried mothers with children in tow, how she maintained her dignity even when Cooper criticized her work in hushed but cutting tones. Keanu recognized in her a quality he admired: resilience without resentment, kindness without expectation of return. Keanu had grown up with a single mother himself. He understood the balancing act, the constant worry, the sacrificed sleep, the prioritizing of children's needs above one's own. When he overheard Ella briefly mention to a coworker that she had been up all night with her son's asthma attack but still made it to her 5 a.m. shift, something in him recognized her struggle in a deeply personal way. The cafe had its regulars: college students who spread textbooks across tables for hours, retired couples who came for their daily ritual of shared pastry and conversation, business people who conducted informal meetings over lattes. Many, like Keanu, had developed a fondness for Ella's genuine warmth. For some, her smile was the first kindness they encountered each day. Cooper, in contrast, barely acknowledged the customers unless they were wealthy or influential. He reserved his charm for potential investors or business associates, those who might further his ambitions beyond this stepping stone cafe. His employees were merely props in the performance he put on for these important connections. The tension between Ella's authentic care for the cafe community and Cooper's cold business calculations had been building for months. Regular customers noticed how the warm atmosphere had gradually chilled, how staff turnover increased, how Ella's smile sometimes seemed forced as she tried to compensate for increasingly poor management. But no one, not the loyal customers, not Ella's co-workers, and certainly not Keanu, Could have predicted how dramatically things would change on that rainy Tuesday morning, when Cooper Tower decided that Ella Miller's usefulness had come to an end, and Keanu Reeves discovered that sometimes even a quiet, private man must take a very public stand. The morning had started like any other. Rain pattered against the cafe windows, creating streams that distorted the view of hurried commuters outside. The weather had driven more people than usual into the warmth of downtown cafe, creating a line that stretched to the door. Ella moved with practiced efficiency, her hands flying between the espresso machine and the register, somehow managing to maintain genuine conversation with each customer despite the rush. Keanu sat in his usual corner booth, script pages spread before him, though his attention had drifted to the controlled chaos of the morning rush. He admired how Ella orchestrated it all, a conductor leading a symphony of coffee orders and pastry selections with graceful precision. The two baristas working alongside her followed her lead, though they lacked her natural warmth and efficiency. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the murmur of customer conversations. Cooper Tower entered, shaking raindrops from his umbrella with obvious distaste. His eyes immediately narrowed at the sight of the long line. Not at the business opportunity it represented, but at the inconvenience of having to navigate through common people to reach his office in the back. He brushed past waiting customers without acknowledgement, his gaze fixed on a small dark spot on the counter that Ella hadn't had time to wipe clean. "Ella," his voice sliced through the ambient chatter, causing the cafe to quiet momentarily. "A word." Ella's smile faltered, but she nodded to a coworker to take over and followed Cooper a few feet away, not to his office for privacy, but merely to the end of the counter where their conversation remained plainly visible to everyone. "This place is a mess," Cooper began, his voice pitched low but carrying in the sudden hush that had fallen. "The line is moving too slowly. The tables haven't been cleared promptly. And I received a complaint about cold coffee yesterday." Ella nodded, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the public dressing down. "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Tower. Jenny called in sick this morning, so we're short-staffed. I've been trying to—" "Excuses," Cooper cut her off with a dismissive wave. "This is the third time this month we've had staffing issues on your shift. Your job is to manage this, not make excuses." From his corner, Keanu observed the interaction with growing discomfort. He wasn't the only one. Regular customers exchanged glances, displeased with Cooper's treatment of the beloved barista. A college student removed her headphones. An elderly man who came every morning for his plain black coffee and crossword puzzle frowned deeply. "I understand," Ella responded, her voice steady despite the flush creeping up her neck. "I'll work on solutions for better coverage moving forward." Cooper's expression darkened as his phone buzzed. He checked it, his frown deepening. When he looked up, his decision was already made. "That won't be necessary," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "I received another offer this morning for the cafe space, a national chain willing to pay triple the rent. They'll bring their own staff." His eyes scanned the busy cafe without emotion. "All this quaint neighborhood charm isn't profitable enough. I've been planning the transition for weeks." Ella's face paled. "You're selling the cafe? What about everyone's jobs?" "That's not my concern," Cooper replied coldly. "But yours ends today. You're fired, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Several customers gasped. A coffee cup clattered against a saucer. "But," Ella's voice wavered for the first time, "I have shifts scheduled all week. You need to turn in your apron and leave." Cooper's voice hardened. "Now." Ella stood frozen, the color draining from her face. "Mr. Tower, please. I have children. My son's medication. I can't lose the health insurance. Could I at least work until—" "This isn't a negotiation," Cooper interrupted, loud enough now that everyone in the cafe heard clearly. "I've tolerated your mediocre management because finding replacements is troublesome. But now it's unnecessary." He held out his hand. "Apron." With trembling fingers, Ella untied her apron. The cafe had fallen completely silent. Every customer watched as she folded it carefully, a small, dignified act in the face of humiliation, and handed it to Cooper. "My last paycheck," she asked quietly, "will be mailed, minus the cost of the register shortages from last week." At this, Keanu slowly set down his coffee cup. He'd been in the cafe that day. There had been no shortages. He had watched Ella count out the drawer twice at the manager's request, proving the money matched the sales to the penny. Ella stood straighter, dignity gathering around her like armor despite the tears welling in her eyes. The register balanced perfectly last week, Mr. Tower. I have the signed verification forms. Cooper's eyes flashed with cold anger at being challenged, especially publicly. Are you calling me a liar in front of my customers? Perhaps you'd prefer I involve the authorities regarding those missing funds. The implied threat hung in the air. An older woman at a nearby table audibly scoffed. A businessman in a suit closed his laptop with a sharp click, clearly disgusted. But no one intervened, not until Ella whispered, "My children," her voice breaking on the words, one tear finally escaping to trail down her cheek. It was then that Keanu Reeves stood up, his movement creating a ripple of recognition through the cafe. Until now, most customers had respectfully maintained his privacy, but as he walked toward the counter, whispers of his name spread through the room. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice quiet but carrying such authority that Cooper involuntarily took a step back. "I couldn't help overhearing. There seems to be a misunderstanding about the register." Ella Miller walked away from downtown cafe clutching her purse, the weight of Cooper's words heavier than the rain now soaking through her thin jacket. She hadn't thought to bring an umbrella. Why would she? She'd expected to be inside the warm cafe until her shift ended at 4, not standing on a rain-drenched sidewalk at 10 in the morning, unemployed and terrified. Her apartment was 30 minutes away by bus. She didn't have the luxury of calling a rideshare. Every dollar mattered now. The bus stop offered minimal shelter as she huddled beneath it, her mind racing with calculations she couldn't make work no matter how many times she tried. Rent was due in 8 days. Liam's asthma medication would run out in 12. The small savings she'd managed to set aside would cover perhaps 2 weeks, 3 if they ate nothing but rice and beans. The bus arrived, and Ella boarded mechanically, her body going through the motions while her mind spun with panic. She'd need to find another job immediately, but who would hire her without a proper reference? Cooper would certainly sabotage any attempt she made. The healthcare coverage that came with her cafe position had been the only thing keeping Liam's asthma manageable. Without it, each inhaler would cost nearly a week's groceries. The bus lurched forward, carrying Ella toward an apartment she might not be able to keep. She stared out the rain-streaked window, remembering the day she'd first gotten the job at downtown cafe. Emma had been 6 then, Liam just 4, both still reeling from their father's abandonment. The stability of regular hours, decent pay, and healthcare had felt like salvation after months of temporary positions and mounting medical bills. In 3 years, she had never been late. She'd worked holidays, covered for sick co-workers, stayed late without overtime pay when Cooper demanded it. She'd built relationships with customers who came in precisely because of her warmth, her care, her ability to remember their complicated orders and personal stories. And none of it had mattered in the end. The apartment building came into view, a plain, weathered complex that was far from luxurious but had been home. Ella trudged up 3 flights of stairs, each step heavier than the last. Mrs. Patel from next door was just leaving for her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. "Ella? Why are you home so early? Are you sick?" The older woman's concern was genuine. She often watched Emma and Liam when Ella had to work late. Ella couldn't bring herself to say the words. She simply shook her head, her eyes filling with tears she'd managed to hold back until now. Mrs. Patel immediately understood, pulling Ella into a brief hug. "Come by later if you need anything," she whispered before hurrying down the stairs, late for her shift. The apartment was quiet and small, 2 bedrooms, with Ella sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room so her children could have their own space. The walls were decorated with Emma's artwork and Liam's school certificates. A bookshelf held their modest collection of books, many from second-hand stores, each one read multiple times at bedtime. The kitchen was spotless. Ella couldn't afford to replace things, so she maintained everything with meticulous care. She sank onto the couch, finally allowing herself to break down now that no one could see. The tears came in heaving sobs as the full impact hit her. It wasn't just a job she'd lost. It was security, stability, the ability to provide for her children without constant fear. The cafe job had allowed her to be present for her kids in ways other positions hadn't. She could take Emma to dance class on Thursdays, attend Liam's doctor appointments without risking termination. Now all of that was gone. Ella allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to cry. No more. She couldn't afford the luxury of extended grief. The digital clock on the microwave showed 10:42 a.m. The kids would be in school until 3:15. She had exactly 4 hours and 33 minutes to start rebuilding their lives. First, she took inventory of their resources. The savings account held $846.12, enough for rent but nothing else. The pantry contained pasta, rice, canned beans, and enough food to stretch for perhaps 2 weeks with careful planning. Liam had one full inhaler and half of another. Emma needed new shoes for school, but that would have to wait. Ella opened her laptop, a refurbished model she'd purchased on installment from the pawn shop 3 blocks away. She began applying for every job she could find, knowing the odds were against her. Most would require references. Most wouldn't offer immediate health benefits. None would understand when she needed to leave early for Liam's asthma treatments or Emma's parent-teacher conferences. By 1 p.m., she had submitted 12 applications. By 2 p.m., 23. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen, her fingers cramped from typing the same information repeatedly, but she continued. She couldn't afford to stop. At 2:48 p.m., her phone rang. An unknown number. Ella answered, her voice carefully controlled to hide the desperation she felt. "Hello. Is this Ella Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. Ms. Miller, my name is Eleanor Watts. I'm calling about the incident at Downtown Cafe this morning." Ella's breath caught. Had Cooper called the police? Was he actually going to accuse her of theft? "I was there," Eleanor continued. "I've been coming to that cafe for years, and what happened to you today was disgraceful." Ella exhaled slowly. "Thank you, but I'm not sure what." "I'm an attorney, Ms. Miller. Employment law. And what I witnessed today was a textbook case of wrongful termination, possibly with additional violations regarding wage theft and defamation." Ella closed her eyes, a tiny flicker of hope battling with practicality. "I appreciate that, Ms. Watts, but I can't afford legal fees, and I need to find a job immediately, not fight a court case that could take months." "I understand completely," Eleanor replied. "But you should know that after you left, several things happened. For one, many of the customers walked out. For another, Mr. Reeves stayed." Ella's eyes opened. "Keanu Reeves? I noticed him standing up, but I was too upset to." "He did more than stand up, Ms. Miller. After you left, he had quite a conversation with your former employer. I don't know exactly what was said, but Mr. Tower looked shaken afterward. And then Mr. Reeves asked for your contact information." "My information?" Ella repeated, confused. "The barista wouldn't give it to him, of course. Privacy concerns. But Mr. Reeves left his card for you. The barista gave it to me when she saw I was planning to call you anyway." Eleanor paused. "He asked that you call him. And so do I. I'd like to discuss your options, pro bono." Ella stared at the wall, where Liam's inhaler prescription was pinned alongside a calendar marked with Emma's dance recital dates and doctor appointments. The weight on her shoulders shifted slightly. Not gone, but somehow different. "Ms. Miller? Are you still there?" "Yes," Ella said slowly. "Yes, I'm here." "Good. Now, about Mr. Tower's claim regarding register shortages." "There weren't any," Ella interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I balanced that register perfectly. I always do." "He's lying." "I believe you," Eleanor said firmly. "And so did everyone else in that cafe, including Mr. Reeves. That's important, Ella. You have witnesses." For the first time since walking out of the cafe, Ella felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, she was too practical for that, but it was a reminder that she wasn't alone. That people had seen. That her work and her integrity had mattered to someone, even if not to Cooper Tower. The kitchen clock now read 3:02. In 13 minutes, she would need to meet Emma and Liam at the bus stop. She would have to explain why she was home early, find a way to tell them their lives were about to change again, reassure them even though she had no idea what would happen next. But first, she would make a phone call. And perhaps, just perhaps, the kindness of strangers, one famous, one a lawyer, and many just regular coffee drinkers who had witnessed her humiliation, might be enough to help her find her way through this darkness. "I'll call him," Ella said, her voice steadier now. "And you too, Ms. Watts. Thank you. As she hung up the phone, Ella looked around the small apartment, the home she might lose, the sanctuary she had created for her children against the harshness of the world. Then she did what she had always done in the face of impossible odds. She stood up, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to fight with everything she had. Because Emma and Liam would be home soon. And no matter what happened next, they needed to see her standing, not fallen. They needed to believe everything would be okay, even if she didn't yet know how to make it so. Keanu Reeves sat in the back of his hired car, staring at the business card in his hand. Cooper Tower's card, with its embossed lettering and premium cardstock, represented everything Keanu found hollow about certain types of success. All appearance, no substance. The driver navigated through rain-slick streets as Keanu's mind replayed the events that had unfolded after Ella left the cafe. Cooper had tried to salvage the situation, his demeanor transforming instantly from tyrannical boss to starstruck fan the moment he recognized Keanu. The performance had been transparent and pitiful. "Mr. Reeves, what an honor. I apologize for that unpleasant scene. Some employees simply can't handle the pressures of service industry work. Perhaps we could discuss this privately? I'd be happy to comp your coffee for a month." Keanu had declined, his voice quiet but firm. "I'd prefer to discuss your accusation about register shortages. I was here last Friday evening and witnessed Ms. Miller balance the register. Twice." Cooper's smile had faltered then, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Business matters can be complicated, Mr. Reeves. I'm sure you understand that running a company sometimes requires difficult personnel decisions." "I understand integrity," Keanu had replied. "And I understand wage theft is illegal in all 50 states. The cafe had remained silent, customers and remaining staff watching the exchange with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Cooper had glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that his audience was not on his side. "I'll need Ella Miller's contact information," Keanu had said calmly. "I can't provide employee information," Cooper had stammered. "Privacy policies. Ex-employee," someone had muttered from a nearby table. "Fine." Keanu had placed his card on the counter. "Have her call me." Then, addressing the room at large, "If anyone here witnessed what happened and is willing to provide a statement, I'd appreciate your help." To Cooper's visible dismay, nearly every customer had reached for Keanu's card. An older woman had stepped forward, introducing herself as Eleanor Watts, an employment attorney. She'd taken Keanu's card and promised to contact Ella directly. Now, as the car pulled up to downtown cafe's parent company headquarters, Keanu reflected on why this situation had affected him so deeply. He'd seen injustice before. It was impossible to move through the world without encountering it. But something about Ella's quiet dignity in the face of Cooper's cruelty had struck a chord. Perhaps it was the memory of his own mother's struggles, or perhaps it was simply that he had been in a position to help and couldn't ignore that responsibility. "Wait here, please," he told the driver, stepping out into the rain. Tower Hospitality Group occupied the top floor of a gleaming office building. The receptionist looked up in shock as Keanu approached, water dripping from his jacket. "I'd like to speak with whoever oversees Downtown Cafe," he said politely. "Mr. Reeves." Of course. Just a moment." The young woman fumbled with her phone, whispering urgently into it. Within minutes, Keanu was ushered into a conference room where an older man waited, his resemblance to Cooper Tower unmistakable though his expression was considerably less smug. "Harrison Tower," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "CEO of Tower Hospitality Group and Cooper's father. This is unexpected but certainly welcome, Mr. Reeves." Keanu shook his hand briefly. "I wish it were under better circumstances. I'm here about an incident at Downtown Cafe this morning." Harrison's expression shifted subtly. You witnessed my son's announcement about the cafe sale." "I witnessed him publicly humiliate and fire a dedicated employee, then falsely accuse her of theft as justification for withholding her final paycheck," Keanu corrected mildly. "I'm curious if that reflects your company's values." Harrison's professional smile faded. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Tell me exactly what happened." For the next 20 minutes, Keanu detailed the morning's events. He spoke without embellishment or accusation, simply stating facts as he had observed them. Harrison listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is concerning," he said finally. "But with all due respect, Mr. Reeves, I'm not sure why you've taken such an interest in this particular employee situation. Keanu met his gaze directly. I've been coming to that cafe for months. Ella Miller runs it with efficiency and genuine care. Your son fired her without cause, threatened her with false theft accusations, and plans to eliminate everyone else's jobs by selling to a chain, all while customers watched. One of those customers happens to be an employment attorney who believes Ella has grounds for multiple legal claims. Harrison leaned back, absorbing this information. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'll speak with Cooper immediately. That's a start, Keanu acknowledged. But it doesn't help Ella, who has 2 children and just lost her income and health care. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Reeves? I'm suggesting you might want to investigate how your son manages all your properties. Downtown Cafe isn't just a building and equipment. It's people who've built relationships with the community. From a purely business perspective, that has value your son doesn't seem to recognize. Harrison studied Keanu for a moment. You're not what the tabloids would have people believe, are you? Few people are, Keanu replied simply. After leaving Tower Hospitality Group, Keanu made 2 more stops. The first was to a modest law office where Eleanor Watts had agreed to meet him and share what she'd learned about Ella's situation. The second was to the apartment complex where Ella lived, information Eleanor had provided with Ella's permission. The building was exactly as he had imagined, not run down but certainly showing its age, the kind of place where working families made homes while dreaming of something better. He knocked on apartment 3B, aware of how strange his presence must seem in this hallway. The door opened partially, secured by a chain. Ella Miller's surprised eyes appeared in the gap. Mr. Reeves, she said, her voice betraying her shock. I was going to call you. I just needed to get my children settled first. I understand, Keanu replied gently. May I come in? I think we should talk about Cooper Tower, his father, and what happens next. Ella hesitated, then closed the door to remove the chain. When it reopened, Keanu could see her 2 children seated at a small table behind her, school books open, their curious eyes fixed on the famous stranger at their door. Mom, is that? The boy began. Yes, Liam, Ella said, her voice steady despite her obvious uncertainty. This is Mr. Reeves. He was at the cafe today. She turned back to Keanu. Please come in. We don't have much to offer, but I just made tea. Tea would be perfect, Keanu said, stepping into the small apartment that felt more like a home than many mansions he'd visited. And please, call me Keanu. I think we have a lot to talk about. As he entered, he noticed the prescription inhaler on the counter, the carefully mended clothes hanging to dry, the walls decorated with children's artwork, all the signs of a parent doing everything possible to create stability and warmth on limited resources. It only strengthened his resolve to address not just Ella's immediate situation, but the larger injustice that had allowed it to happen. Keanu sat at Ella's small kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea warming his hands. Emma and Liam had been shy at first, stealing glances at the famous visitor, but children's natural resilience soon won out. Now Emma was showing him her art portfolio, drawings remarkably sophisticated for an 8-year-old, while Liam explained his science project on renewable energy. Ella watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety, the day's events still etched in the tired lines around her eyes. They're extraordinary, Keanu said quietly to Ella as the children returned to their homework. You've done an amazing job with them. They make it easy, Ella replied, though the strain in her voice revealed the truth. Nothing about raising 2 children alone while working full-time had been easy. Mr. Reeves. Keanu, he corrected gently. Keanu, she amended. I appreciate your concern, but I'm still not sure why you're involved. What happened today was awful, but it happens to people every day. That doesn't make it right, Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. And sometimes change starts with one person's story. He set down his mug. I've been speaking with Eleanor Watts. She believes you have a strong case for wrongful termination, defamation, and attempted wage theft. Ella's expression clouded. Legal battles take time. My children need to eat next week. I understand, Keanu nodded. That's why this isn't just about legal action. I've also spoken with Harrison Tower, Cooper's father and the CEO of Tower Hospitality Group. Ella's eyebrows rose. You spoke with the owner? He was concerned about the situation. especially when I mentioned that most of the cafe's regular customers witnessed the incident, and one happened to be an employment attorney. Keanu's lips curved in a slight smile. He seemed particularly troubled by the potential publicity. For the first time since her termination, a spark of hope flickered in Ella's eyes. What did he say? He's investigating the situation. But I don't think we should wait for corporate wheels to turn. Keanu leaned forward. Ella, what do you want? The question caught her off guard. What do I want? If you could choose your path forward from here, not just reacting to what happened, but creating something better, what would that look like? Ella was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to her children. Security, she said finally. Not luxury or wealth. Just knowing we'll be okay. That Liam will have his medication. That Emma can take her art classes. That I won't have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. She looked back at Keanu. And respect. I want to work somewhere that values hard work and basic human dignity. Keanu nodded slowly. What if you could have the cafe? Ella's eyes widened. What? Downtown cafe. What if you could run it, not as an employee, but as the owner? That's impossible, Ella whispered. I have no capital, no business experience beyond management, no. You have 3 years of practical experience running that cafe day to day, Keanu countered. You know the customers, the suppliers, the rhythms of the business. Cooper doesn't. He's barely there. And Harrison is considering options for the location's future. But the national chain is offering money, not community value, Keanu finished. And Harrison Tower isn't as short-sighted as his son. He built that company from a single location. He understands customer loyalty. Even if that were true, I couldn't afford to buy the business, Ella protested. There are options, Keanu said. Investment groups. Small business loans. Community ownership models. He smiled slightly. And private investors who believe in supporting local businesses. Understanding dawned in Ella's eyes. You? But why would you? Because sometimes the world works exactly as it should, Keanu said simply. The right person gets the right opportunity at the right time, not because of privilege or connections, but because it's what should happen. Ella's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed his words. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, Keanu replied. While we work on immediate concerns. Eleanor is filing an emergency injunction regarding your termination. By tomorrow, Harrison Tower will likely offer reinstatement with back pay, the alternative being a public relations nightmare and potential legal battle. You've thought of everything, Ella said, a hint of wonder in her voice. Not everything, Keanu admitted. Just the next right steps. He glanced at a family photo on the wall, Ella with her arms around Emma and Liam, all three smiling despite what must have been difficult circumstances. Cooper Tower saw expendable employees. I see a community cornerstone and 2 children who deserve security. Over the next 3 days, Keanu's quiet intervention set several wheels in motion. Eleanor Watts filed the injunction as promised, but also reached out to local media contacts with Ella's story, not for immediate publication, but as leverage. Harrison Tower, faced with potential public relations damage and legal action, arranged a meeting with Ella, offering not just reinstatement but a formal apology and a position overseeing all 4 cafe locations in the city. Ella, with Eleanor and Keanu's guidance, made a counter-proposal. She would return to work, but only under specific conditions. These included healthcare benefits for all employees working more than 20 hours weekly, a formal review of Cooper's management practices, and the opportunity to present a business plan for eventually purchasing the downtown cafe location. To Ella's surprise, Harrison agreed to all conditions. What she didn't know was that Keanu had arranged a separate meeting with the Elder Tower, during which he had outlined a partnership model. Keanu would provide initial capital for Ella to purchase the cafe, while Tower Hospitality Group would maintain a minority stake, ensuring their continued interest in the location's success while transferring operational control to Ella. Why are you doing this? Harrison had asked. You could invest in anything. Why a small cafe and a single mother you barely know? Keanu had considered the question carefully. I believe in recognizing genuine value, he'd finally answered. Ella built something rare in that cafe, a place that matters to people. Not because of the coffee, but because of the community she created. That has meaning beyond profit margins. When Keanu shared the developing plan with Ella on the fourth day, sitting in her small living room while Emma and Liam played a board game nearby, she listened with growing amazement. "This can't be real," she whispered when he finished explaining. "Things like this don't happen to people like me." "They should," Keanu replied simply. "You earned this through years of work that went unrecognized. I'm just helping correct an imbalance." Ella's eyes filled with tears, not of despair this time, but of possibility. "How can I ever thank you?" "By building something remarkable," Keanu said. "And maybe by remembering that kindness matters, even when it seems the world has forgotten." He glanced at Emma and Liam, who were now watching their mother with curious eyes. Some lessons are worth teaching the next generation. As Keanu prepared to leave, Liam approached shyly, holding a folded paper. "Mr. Reeves? I made this for you." He handed over a carefully drawn picture of Keanu standing beside their mother at the cafe counter, both smiling. Beneath it, in a child's careful printing, "Thank you for helping my mom." Keanu accepted the drawing with a solemnity it deserved. "This is perfect, Liam. I'll keep it always." Walking to his car, Keanu looked back at the modest apartment building. The plan wasn't just about securing Ella's future now. It had become about creating a small but meaningful change in a system that too often valued profit over people. Cooper Tower would learn an important lesson, and perhaps others would too. Sometimes, Keanu reflected, the most revolutionary act was simply recognizing another person's humanity and refusing to look away from injustice, even when society had normalized it. As his car pulled away from the curb, Keanu felt a quiet satisfaction. The plan was taking shape, and with it, the possibility of something better than what had been before. The morning of Ella's return to downtown cafe dawned clear and bright, the previous week's rain giving way to sunshine that streamed through the cafe's large windows. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood. Ella was coming back, and something significant had changed. By 8 a.m., a line of customers stretched out the door, many holding small handwritten signs of support. Inside, Cooper Tower paced nervously, his usual arrogance diminished by the crowd outside and his father's stern instructions. Harrison Tower sat at a corner table, reviewing documents and occasionally glancing at his watch. The atmosphere was tense, expectant, as if the cafe itself were holding its breath. At precisely 8:30, a black car pulled up outside. Ella emerged first, wearing not her usual work clothes but a simple, professional blue dress. Eleanor Watts accompanied her, briefcase in hand. And behind them came Keanu Reeves, his presence causing a ripple of whispers through the waiting crowd. As they entered, spontaneous applause broke out, not just for Keanu, though his celebrity certainly contributed, but for Ella. Regular customers called out greetings, expressing how much they'd missed her, even though she'd only been gone less than a week. Ella's eyes widened at the reception, a flush of color rising to her cheeks. Cooper stepped forward, hand extended in what was clearly a rehearsed gesture. "Ella, welcome back. I'm pleased we could resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." Ella didn't take his hand. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes, something she had rarely done before. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Tower. It was wrong. But I'm not here to dwell on that. I'm here to work." Cooper's smile faltered as he lowered his hand. "Yes, well, we've prepared a statement for the customers explaining that." "I don't think explanations are necessary," Eleanor interjected smoothly. The terms of Ella's return were quite clear. "Perhaps we should discuss the implementation details in private." Harrison Tower rose from his table, approaching the group with the deliberate confidence of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. "Good morning, Ella. Ms. Watts." He nodded to each in turn before extending his hand to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for coming." The elder Tower gestured toward the small office at the back of the cafe. "Shall we?" As they moved toward the office, customers continued to file in, greeted by the remaining staff who seemed energized by Ella's return. The small room quickly became crowded with Ella, both Towers, Eleanor, and Keanu all trying to find space. "Let's make this simple," Harrison began, placing a folder on the desk. "These documents formalize our agreement. Ella will be reinstated with back pay and an apology. She will oversee all 4 Tower Cafe locations effective immediately, reporting directly to me. And we've included the framework for the ownership transition of this location, to be completed within 6 months. Cooper's head snapped up. Ownership transition? What are you talking about? Harrison regarded his son coolly. Ms. Miller will be purchasing the downtown cafe location, with Tower Hospitality Group maintaining a minority stake. That's absurd. Cooper sputtered. You can't seriously be considering selling our most profitable location to an employee who was fired for incompetence. An employee you fired unjustly, Harrison corrected sharply. And yes, I am. Because unlike you, Cooper, I've reviewed the actual performance metrics of all our properties. This location has the highest customer retention, strongest community reputation, and most consistent growth, all under Ella's day-to-day management, not yours. Cooper's face flushed dark red. This is because of him, isn't it? He jabbed a finger toward Keanu. You're letting celebrity influence cloud your business judgment. My judgment is perfectly clear, Harrison replied evenly. Mr. Reeves simply brought to my attention something I should have seen myself. You've been mismanaging this cafe and mistreating its staff. That stops today. Cooper turned to Ella, his expression ugly with resentment. You think you can run this place? Without my connections, my business acumen? You're a barista, not a businesswoman. Ella met his gaze steadily. I'm the person who knows every regular customer by name. I'm the person who worked with suppliers when you forgot to place orders. I'm the person who trained every new hire because you couldn't be bothered. And yes, I'm a barista, one who loves this cafe enough to sacrifice for it, which is more than you've ever done. The room fell silent. Even Harrison seemed taken aback by Ella's quiet strength. Keanu, who had remained silent, now spoke. Success isn't measured by how much you take, Mr. Tower. It's measured by what you build and who you lift up along the way. His voice was soft but carried unmistakable conviction. Your father built something meaningful. You had the opportunity to continue that legacy. Instead, you chose to extract value rather than create it. Cooper looked from Keanu to his father, then to Ella, searching for an ally and finding none. This is ridiculous. I won't be lectured on business by an actor and a coffee server. Then perhaps you should listen to me, Harrison said firmly. Sign the papers transferring oversight authority to Ella, or clean out your office at headquarters. Those are your options. For a moment, it seemed Cooper might storm out. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw working with unspoken fury. But self-interest eventually won out over pride. With jerky movements, he grabbed a pen and scrawled his signature on the indicated lines. Congratulations, he said bitterly to Ella. I hope you enjoy working 60-hour weeks for marginal profits. He tossed the pen down and pushed past the others, not bothering to close the door behind him. Harrison watched him go with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. I apologize for my son's behavior, Ella. It seems I've failed in more ways than one. He turned to her. But I believe we have an opportunity to correct course now. Ella nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. I won't let you down, Mr. Tower. I know you won't, Harrison replied. Now, I believe there's a cafe full of people waiting to welcome you back. He gestured toward the door. As Ella stepped out of the office, the crowd of customers erupted in fresh applause. Someone had brought flowers. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly woman who came every morning for her chamomile tea, pressed a small card into Ella's hand. The other staff members looked on with expressions ranging from relief to amazement. Keanu hung back, allowing Ella her moment. This was her victory, her community, her future taking shape. Eleanor sidled up beside him, speaking quietly. You know, most celebrities would have just written a check and considered their good deed done, she observed. Why get so personally involved? Keanu watched as Ella moved through the cafe, greeting customers, hugging her coworkers, her smile genuine for the first time in years. Because sometimes people need more than money, he answered simply. Sometimes they need to know they matter. As the morning progressed, Ella moved behind the counter, tying on her apron with practiced ease. But something had changed. The subtle shift in how she carried herself, the confidence in her movements, the way the other staff naturally deferred to her guidance. She wasn't just back at her job, she was stepping into a new role, one that recognized what she had been all along, the heart and soul of downtown cafe. Keanu stayed for his usual coffee, watching the transformation from his corner table. When Ella finally had a moment to bring his order, she set it down with hands that still trembled slightly from the morning's events. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You already have," Keanu replied, gesturing to the bustling cafe around them, "by showing everyone what's possible when basic decency wins out over greed. That's a lesson worth more than any cafe." Ella nodded, understanding that what had happened transcended her individual circumstances. It was about challenging a system that too often devalued the very people who made it function. "Will you come back?" she asked. "After all this settles down? For the best coffee in town?" Keanu smiled. "Absolutely." As he sipped his coffee, Keanu observed Cooper Tower standing across the street, watching the thriving cafe with resentment etched into his features. Their eyes met briefly through the window, and Keanu raised his cup in a small salute, not mocking, but acknowledging the lesson Cooper had been forced to learn, that true success came not from position or power, but from how you treated the people around you. Cooper turned away, disappearing into the stream of pedestrians. But something in his hesitation, the slight slump of his shoulders, suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, a seed had been planted. And that, Keanu reflected, might ultimately be the most important outcome of all. 6 months later, downtown cafe hummed with life on a crisp autumn morning. The space had undergone subtle but meaningful changes. Warmer lighting, more comfortable seating, local artists' work adorning the walls. Behind the counter, a small plaque read, "Ella Miller, owner and manager," its simple presence representing a transformation that extended far beyond mere business ownership. Ella moved through the cafe with quiet confidence, greeting regular customers by name, mentoring new staff members, embodying the compassionate leadership that had always been her strength. The cafe had become more than just a coffee shop. It was a community touchstone where people connected, where kindness was currency as valuable as the money exchanged. Emma and Liam sat at what had become their table near the kitchen, doing homework after school. Their lives had stabilized in ways both tangible and intangible. Liam's asthma was properly managed with regular medication. Emma had joined an advanced art program, her talents nurtured rather than sidelined by financial constraints. Most importantly, they saw their mother standing tall, respected, secure in her place in the world. The bell above the door chimed. Ella looked up, her face brightening at the sight of Keanu Reeves entering. He came less frequently now. His filming schedule had taken him to other cities, but he made a point of stopping by whenever he was in town. "The usual?" Ella asked as he approached the counter. "Please," Keanu nodded, scanning the bustling cafe with appreciative eyes. "Business looks good." "Better than projections," Ella confirmed, preparing his coffee with practiced hands. "Harrison's been impressed with the quarterly reports." "And Cooper?" Keanu asked, though he already knew the answer from Harrison's occasional updates. Ella's expression turned thoughtful. "He's changed, actually." Harrison reassigned him to their struggling location across town. At first, he was bitter, but something shifted. Last week, he implemented a staff incentive program and improved their healthcare coverage. She handed Keanu his coffee. "Harrison thinks watching this place thrive under a different model made an impression." Keanu accepted the cup with a small smile. "Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers." Ella nodded toward Emma and Liam. "They ask about you, you know. Liam has your drawing framed beside his bed." "I have his on my desk," Keanu replied. "It reminds me of what matters." They shared a moment of understanding. Two people from vastly different worlds who had discovered a common truth about the importance of human dignity. The cafe around them stood as testament to the change that was possible when that truth was honored. "Thank you," Ella said quietly, "not for the first time. Not just for saving my job or helping me buy this place. For showing my children that the world can be better than it sometimes appears." Keanu shook his head gently. "You showed them that, Ella. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." As Keanu moved to his usual corner table, he reflected on how a seemingly small act, standing up in a cafe one rainy morning, had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have predicted. Downtown Cafe had become a model that Harrison Tower was now implementing across all his properties. Eleanor Watts had taken on 3 more cases of employee mistreatment, working pro bono. and Ella Miller had transformed from a struggling single mother to a business owner whose management style proved that compassion and success could go hand in hand. Sometimes, Keanu thought as he sipped his coffee and watched the life flowing through the cafe, the most powerful acts weren't the grand gestures that made headlines, but the quiet refusals to accept injustice when confronted with it. In that moment, in that choice, worlds could change. One small cafe, one single mother, one cruel boss at a time.